Thank you for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Hindy, and this is my wife.
Omnia, Helbah.
And Alhamdulillah, we're trying to bring her power onto these live casts because I get bored of hearing myself, to be honest. So I'm sure it's the same for many of you. And I think, inshallah, we're trying to lean on each other's strengths. And Omnia does a lot of corporate training, and she deals with a lot of these themes related to optimism, which we're going to discuss today, related to building resiliency in terms of like leadership skills and things similar to that. So I think something wrong with our Instagram page. Just going to try that. Inshallah, we're going to discuss optimism today. I'm kind of going to take the lead on optimism, and inshallah on Thursday when we talk about resiliency, Omnia inshallah is going to be taking more of the lead on that one because she has a presentation really set out for that. Obviously we're in these unprecedented, really difficult times, and I think people can get really frazzled and shaken by it. I think in our regular day-to-day life, you kind of take things for granted, including you take for granted that you're going to wake up in the morning, go to work, your kids are going to go to school, that you're going to go to the store and everything's going to be there, that you're not going to go to a store and find that all the bread is gone and all the milk is gone and things like that. We take a lot of these things for granted, even though in reality, even under quote-unquote normal circumstances, you still, nothing is promised to you tomorrow, right? You don't know that anything tomorrow is actually going to be there.
Yeah.
But we kind of get into this mindset where we think it is going to be there.
Yeah. And
we act like it is going to be there. And now, because literally we don't actually know what tomorrow's going to hold, because anything can happen tomorrow, just like anything happened yesterday. I mean, this past week has been a year worth of events packed into one week. I think it gets people really afraid and, feeling like doom and gloom and everything bad is going to happen. So I felt like let's talk about, as Muslims, what should our disposition be? No matter how difficult things are, no matter how bad the situation is, no matter how intense the wars might be, or how intense the virus might be, or how much we are struggling in terms of disunity, and how much we're struggling in terms of disagreements between each other, what should the mindset of the believer be?
Yeah.
And one thing that I was reflecting on is, the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are different in their characteristics, right? Like the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he was with Abu Bakr and Umar, he said to Abu Bakr, "You are more like Ibrahim and Isa." And he said to Umar, "You are more like Musa and Nuh." Right? And the reason is, if you look at the Qur'an, the Prophet ﷺ says, he mentions this, that Nuh and Musa make dua against their people. And they have the characteristics of being kind of strict, very intent on establishing justice. Right? This is a part of their characteristics. So Musa makes dua against Fir'aun, Nuh makes dua against those who are opposing him. And as for Ibrahim and Isa, they are very forbearing, tolerant, seeking the mercy of Allah. Both of them make dua even for their enemies, right? And that's even in the Qur'an as well. In tu'adhibhum فَإِنَّهُمْ عِبَادَكَ, that Isa says, "Oh Allah, if you punish them, they're your servants, but if you forgive, you are the most forgiving." So he's implying, "Oh Allah, please forgive them," right? And it shows you they have different characteristics. But one thing, when you look at the Qur'an and when you look at the Qur'an and Sunnah, you look at all the prophets and the messengers, almost all of them were optimistic. In fact, all of them were optimistic, not almost. All of them were optimistic. No matter the circumstances, you find a theme constantly over and over and over. Any story you look at, there's optimism in it, right? So for instance, one story is Musa alayhi salam. He's with his people. In front of them is the Red Sea. Behind them is an army intent on massacring them, killing them, destroying them. And all the people, what do they say? قَالُوا إِنَّا لَمُدْرَكُونَ. Allah mentions in the Qur'an, they say, we are going to be overcome. We are going to be destroyed. Right? Because you have either an army that's going to kill you or a sea that's going to drown you. And Musa says, كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعِي رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ. He says, no, my Lord is with me. He will help me. right? And that idea of being optimistic, no matter how difficult things are. And that comes out of what?
True belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly, having that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that no matter the circumstance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be there, He's going to take care of me. No matter the difficulty, Allah wants this difficulty for a reason. So trusting, the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's something that the scholars always talk about, which is husn al-dhann billah. The Prophet talks about as well. That having beautiful thoughts about Allah. That you're constantly thinking beautiful things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you're not thinking with negativity towards Allah, but you're thinking constantly with positivity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another example is, of course, Yaqub alayhi salam. And, we see in the story of Yusuf, Yusuf is taken away from him. And, decades of him crying over Yusuf. And then Binyamin, his other son, is taken away from him. And now he has two sons taken away from him. And then his eyesight is taken away from him because of the grief that he's in. And despite all of this, what does he say to his sons? اذهبوا فتحسسوا من يوسف وأخيه ولا تيأسوا من روح الله. He says, go and seek Yusuf and his brother. Go find them. And it's been decades since Yusuf is gone. Like Yusuf is gone as a child. At this point, he's maybe in his 50s or 40s, 50s, something like that. And he says, اذهبوا فتحسسوا. Go find him. ولا تيأسوا من روح الله. And do not despair from the belief of Allah. إنه لا يأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون. Nobody despairs from the belief of Allah except those who disbelieve. And his sons, they say to him, when are you going to forget Yusuf? When are you going to forget him? You're not going to forget him until you die or you're senile. And he tells them, إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. I complain to Allah. وأعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون. And I know from Allah that which you don't know. I.e., I know Allah's mercy. I know that Allah is wise. I know that Allah is generous. I'm certain in my belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I know Allah. Everything else becomes something that I'm totally I'm certain that Allah's going to take care of me. And even the end of that verse, إنه لا يأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون. Nobody despairs from the mercy of Allah except those who disbelieve. There's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, someone asks him, what are the worst sins? He said, al-ishraku billah, you associate and worship with Allah. Number one, al-qunutu min rahmatillah, that you despair from the mercy of Allah. Wal-ya'su min ruhillah, and that you despair from or you lose hope in the relief of Allah. And all three are connected. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because you're going to only be optimistic as strong as your faith in Allah is, right? Yeah. As much as your understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is.
Yeah. It's how limiting you create Allah in your mind. Like, how does He have limits, or is He actually merciful?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like it's speaking to how you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because the person who sins and then he's like, well, God's never going to forgive me, and a lot of people think like that. What are you really saying? You're saying that your sin is greater than Allah. Yeah. Right? And when you have a problem, and the problem you're like, well, this problem is overbearing, we can't deal with it, and none of the doctors can deal. Are you saying that this problem is bigger than Allah? Yeah. Because that's the implication, right? Right. Yeah. And I think we should think that. Even if the whole world can't deal with COVID-19, even if all the doctors can't deal with it, and health systems can't deal with it, and et cetera, but Allah can deal with it, right? Yeah.
I think that's part of the mindset that people are getting into, too. Well, it's going to take another 18 months for them to develop a vaccine, and it's going to take this much longer for them to find a cure, and their mind starts going, and it kind of snowballs. Mm-hmm. Versus thinking, just as quickly as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take it away. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give us a cure. He can, give the scientists something that works and works very rapidly. Which is actually when we think about optimism, it's actually a disposition, it's a mindset around the permanence of the hardship that you're in. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a hardship, the recognition that it's not permanent and the recognition that you're eventually going to get past it is actually critical. And I find that people who are optimistic are able to do this much faster and recognize this impermanence much faster than people who are pessimistic. So it's whenever we think about the prophets and how long some of their trials are and how long they're patient and how long they're optimistic. Mm-hmm. Of course, these are extreme examples of optimism versus what we see on a day-to-day basis. But it's really important to kind of derive that lesson and say, subhanAllah, if they could have not seen his son for decades and still believe he's alive. You know, we're 1 week into isolation and we're depressed. So where's the comparison there? So it's a little bit of a mind shift, I think, just to kind of take into account that this is whatever we're going through is not permanent.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, like the permanence of the difficulty, right? So I think like if you're the more connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you are, the more spirituality you have, I think the more you recognize how impermanent the whole dunya is.
Right.
Like even if the whole dunya from beginning to end was difficulty, you're just like whatever, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
Everything is in the akhirah. Like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about the man who has the most luxurious life in the world, and he's from the disbelievers, and he's brought on the day of judgment, and Allah says, "Ighmisuhu fi an-nar," just dip him, touch him into the hellfire. And when they touch him into the hellfire, like 1 second in the hellfire, they bring him out, and then Allah asks him, "Have you ever experienced luxury?" He says, "No."
Right.
Because the dunya becomes nothing, right?
Yeah.
He realizes how impermanent, how fleeting, how quick, how nothing really it is. And the opposite, somebody who lives the hardest life, most difficult life, maybe quarantine their whole life and things like that.
Right.
And they come on the day of judgment. Allah says, just let him touch Jannah. So a moment in Jannah, a split second in Jannah, he comes out, and Allah asks him, "Did you ever face any difficulty?" And he says, "No."
Right.
And it just shows you how impermanent the dunya is. And it shows you like pessimism comes out of this lack of recognition of, the permanence of the akhirah. And you start thinking the dunya is everything. And the difficulty then becomes everything. Because the dunya is married to difficulty.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. And there's an example too in the Qur'an of, Surah Al-Ahzab. And Al-Ahzab is, it's talking about the Battle of Al-Ahzab, where all the Arabs unite basically to exterminate the Muslims. And they bring this army to Medina, and the intent is, this is the biggest army the Arabs have ever raised, and the idea is they're here to just get rid of everything. Get rid of all the Muslims. And the Muslims, of course, start building the trench around Medina to keep that army at bay. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some of these verses is really, showing us the example of the believer and the example of the hypocrite. So Allah says, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ. When the believers saw the army, قَالُوا هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. They said, Allah promised us this. I.e., they looked at the difficulty, and their interpretation of it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised that there was going to be difficulty before there would be ease.
Right.
Allah promised there's going to be hardship, and we're going to have to overcome that hardship. Yeah. So they see the swords and the army and the bows and arrows, and they see all these people and the cavalry and all that, and they're like, this is the promise of Allah. وَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا. Allah says their iman increased. And then Allah shows us the opposite, that when the hypocrites see the very same army and the very same swords and the very same horses and the very same everything, what do they say? قالوا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بل ظننتم أن لن ينقلب الرسول والمؤمنون إلى أهلهم أبدا. They thought the believers, the Prophet and the believers were never going to go home. They're going to die. Right. And Allah says, وَظَنَنْتُمْ ظَنَّ السُّوءِ. You had very evil thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَكُنْتُمْ قَوْمًا بُورًا. And you became a ruined people. Yeah. Right? And it shows you like pessimism just ruins you, destroys you.
Yeah.
And one of the stories from that very same battle is the Sahaba are digging the trench, and they come across this massive boulder, and they can't break it. So they call the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet comes, and this is of course a miracle of the Prophet. He starts swinging the hammer, and every time he swings it, a piece breaks off from the boulder. And every time he swings the hammer, he says, Allahu Akbar utitu. First time he says, utitu mafatih Sham. I've been given the keys to the kingdoms of Sham, of Syria, Palestine, that area. He strikes it again, I've been given the keys to the kingdoms of Persia. He strikes it a third time, I've been given the keys to the kingdoms of Yemen. And while this is happening, the hypocrites are seeing this. And of course the boulder is breaking as the Prophet strikes it. But the hypocrites, when they see this, they're like making fun of the Prophet. And they're like, look at the situation we're in. We can't even like go to the washroom, because back then going to the washroom means, you walk far away from where everybody lives, and they would relieve themselves, right? But in the situation they're in, there's an army on them.
Right.
So they're like, we can't even go to the washroom, walk far away without like fearing someone's going to shoot us with an arrow. And this guy's talking about kingdoms of Persia and the kingdoms of here and there. So they're so pessimistic. They see the Prophet, they're starting mocking him and insulting him.
Right.
And within their own lifetimes, what happens? The Muslims enter the castles of Persia and Sham and Yemen, like exactly what the Prophet said.
Yeah.
Within their own lifetimes, they see that themselves. And it shows you, like, this is an example Allah is giving you. Believers are optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Believers are optimistic. And so when we want to measure our own belief, our iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how optimistic do we want to be?
Yeah.
How much do we want to push ourselves to constantly be grateful, constantly look on the upside, constantly see the positive of every situation that we're in? And I'll give you one example, and I kind of think it goes to some of the things we were talking about before, that the Prophet goes to meet an elderly man who's sick. And he has a fever, he's sick, and the Prophet enters upon him and he tells him, Tahur inshallah. This is the Sunnah, right? To say Tahur, which means purity inshallah. May you be pure, i.e. may you be pure of your disease, but also may you be pure spiritually, like your sins removed and things like that. And the guy hears the Prophet say this, may you be pure, have purity, may you be purified of this. And he says, Tahur, you're talking about purification? Like, are you crazy? He says, Bal hiya huma tafur. This is a bubbling fever, this is an overwhelming fever. Ala shaykhun kabir, and I'm an old man. Tuziruhu al-qubur. It will certainly take me to my grave. So what does the Prophet say to him? He tells him, Idhan fana'am. If that's what you think, then yes.
Right.
Like if you believe that you're going to die because of this, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas had you chosen to be more optimistic, maybe your end result could be different.
Yeah. And that's interesting because one of the things we teach around optimism is that it can impact your subjective reality. So yes, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. When I'm optimistic, I feel better. Mm-hmm. So your subjective reality, but it actually impacts as well your objective reality. Right. So it can impact your ability to, again, in a workforce context, get that next promotion, overcome getting bad feedback, just kind of growing yourself and continuing to be successful. And so it can actually impact your objective reality, which is interesting because this is exactly what the Prophet says. Is like if that's what you, and I mean, alayhi salatu wasalam, he's talking about, your perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but even outside of that is if this is what you believe is going to happen to you, it's likely going to happen. Mm-hmm. And if you believe otherwise, then, your outcome may be different. Yeah. Right? It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit. Yeah. Actually, there was a study done where they took college students and they separated them in the same class, and they separated them to two groups. And they showed the two groups different videos. So one of them, they showed them a video about stress. And they talked about everything negative with relation to stress. Yeah. So they're like, stress, increases your blood pressure, increases your cholesterol. Stress, is really bad for you because of this reason and that reason. And stress can, cause you to shut down. Everything negative that can be said about stress was in that 5-10 minute video. Yeah. Right? Then they show the other half of the class, a different video, where they talk about how stress is really good for you because when you deal with a stressful situation, you overcome it. That's how you achieve success. That, the best athlete who shot the best shot ever, was under stress when he did that, right? Yeah. The best, inventor who invented something was under stress when they invented. So it shows you how, stress is part of, becoming successful and all that. Right. And then they looked at what happens to both students. And so the first group, their grades went down. Yeah. And they reported higher levels of stress. And the other group reported less levels of stress. Their grades went up on average. And it shows you that the mentality of the person is affected by what you decide to believe about the situation, right? Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to the placebo effect as well. And you give somebody a sugar pill, but you tell them this is going to cure you, and they believe it. They're probably going to have benefits coming out of that. Yeah. And you see this, constantly in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ once visited a woman that was sick as well. And he said to her, how are you? How are you feeling? And she said, Al-huma la barakallahu fiha. She says, I have the fever, may Allah curse it. So she's sick and she's cursing, the sickness that she has.
And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تسب الحمى. Do not curse the fever. Right? Do not curse the fever. We have a virus amongst us. Yeah. The Prophet would be telling you, do not curse the virus. Why? Because there's benefits to it.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that you think is the worst, there's benefits to it. The Prophet said, do not curse the fever, فَإِنَّهَا تَأْكُلْ خَطَايَا ابْنَ آدَمَ كَمَا تَأْكُلُ النَّارُ الْحَطَبِ. He said, for indeed, the fever, or the illness, consumes the sins of the children of Adam, just like fire consumes wood. So he's telling you, at the very least, yes, you're sick. Don't curse the sickness, because that sickness might be removing your sins.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And in the grander scheme of things, when we look at COVID-19 and what's happening in the world, there can be a lot of benefits coming out of this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges I have with, the constant focus that sometimes you see around COVID-19 being a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, yes, it can be for sure it can be a punishment for the, our lack of humanity and our lack of care for the rest of the world. But at the same time, when you just kind of step back and you think about the mercy that comes out of this, like the extra time that you get to spend with family, the shift of perspective. I know a lot of people are, refinding their faith. If they didn't pray, now they're praying. If they didn't repent, now they're repenting. And, subhanAllah, like just sometimes just shifting that perspective a little bit to say, yes, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing us, but there's benefit in that. There's benefit in why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would do that, because ultimately it's for our benefit to reestablish our faith and to become better. So, that's one of the challenges I have with, and I think it's because I'm naturally an optimist. So it's one of the challenges I have with the punishment spin is like, yes, for sure, maybe, but like, what if we don't just view it as a punishment? What if we view it as an opportunity? What if we view it as really a chance that when we come out of this, we're stronger and that we're better and that we have a stronger remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a stronger attachment with the masjid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the plague, ta'un, he said that it is a punishment for some and a mercy for the believer. Right?
Yeah.
So even when the Prophet says that it's a punishment, it's also a mercy too. Right?
Yeah.
And so you should take the perspective of like, what do I want to see this as being? Right?
Yeah.
Don't I want to see this as a mercy? And if I want to see it as a mercy, shouldn't I then deal with it, as though it is a merciful thing that is happening and that it is a mercy for me?
Yeah.
So shouldn't that be in our disposition as well? And even it being a punishment, you should always look at it from a positive perspective. If we consider it to be a punishment, that, a lot of injustice happens in the world. Maybe through this punishment, Allah is stopping injustices that are occurring, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see the Prophet ﷺ constantly uses situations that could be really negative, but he chooses to see it in a positive way. Right? Yeah. So one example is, like, look at the Prophet ﷺ, his entire life, walking the streets of Mecca. People are calling him Sadiq, Ya Ameen, oh, trustworthy one, oh, truthful one, etc., etc. Now when he claims prophethood, the opposite is happening. Right. He's walking the streets and people are insulting him. And one of the things they did was they changed his name from calling him Muhammad. They called him Mudamdam, which means the opposite of Muhammad. So Muhammad means the praised, Mudamdam means the dispraised, right? So the Prophet ﷺ says to his companions, aren't you happy that Allah has caused Quraysh, has repelled or taken away the insults of Quraysh from me? So the companions are like, what are you talking about? All they do is insult you.
Right.
And he says, no, they insult Mudamdam and my name is Muhammad. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And he obviously knows what they're doing, but he's saying, I'm choosing to see this in the most positive way. It's a joke as well, but he's seeing it as the positive way. They're insulting some other guy. They're not talking about me, right? Yeah. Talking about some other guy, right? And, it's just, again, it just goes to the Prophet's disposition of, I'm always going to look at this positively.
Yeah.
Whatever the situation is, I'm always going to interpret it positively.
And you know what the biggest example for me is from the Seerah is when we look at the story of Ta'if. Mm-hmm. And, the Prophet had the opportunity to have all the people in Ta'if punished. Mm-hmm. And he chose not to. Like, he actually said, rather, would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring from their descendants believers. Mm-hmm. And so that optimism, not just in the current state in those people. He didn't say, maybe Allah will change the hearts of these people. His optimism was so forward thinking that he's thinking about the generations that are going to come next.
Yeah.
So their optimism isn't just like the here and now, but it's actually extended. And that's, for me, like, that's one of the greatest examples of optimism, where I'm like, how do you even think beyond your current state and think, well, for future generations, you know, this is going to be a good thing. Right?
Yeah. And that's super important, like, to just look beyond your current situation, moment, to something even grander and deeper. And subhanAllah, you know, when you talk about that, when the Prophet passed away, a lot of the tribes, many of the tribes in Arabia who accepted Islam, when he passed away, they said, we're not following anymore. Or we're going to be Muslims, we're not going to pay zakat, and things like that started to happen. Of the cities that were the most staunchly Muslim was Taif. Right? Yeah. So you see the Prophet's, you know, looking forward, optimism. I think that these people, even though they treated me so badly, even though he called it the worst day of his life. Right? Like Aisha at the Battle of Uhud, and so many of the Sahaba were killed, and Hamza was killed, and he was like a very close friend of the Prophet, and obviously his uncle. And she tells him, was this the worst day of your life? He says, no, the worst day was Taif. Right? He recognizes that's the worst day of his life. And yet, he had that forward thinking, that optimism, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes what he's optimistic about to take place. And it, you know, goes to the idea of having beautiful thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, Allah decreed that there's a difficulty today, but I think Allah can cause something amazing to happen in the future. And constantly think like that. You know, another hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he mentions, that for men and women, for husbands and wives. So he gives advice to the husband, because he's speaking to men in this scenario. He says, no believing man should hate a believing woman. If you dislike something about her, you will like something else. If you dislike one characteristic, you will like something else. And so basically he's telling you, be optimistic. And how many times do marriages fall apart and people come asking for marriage counseling, things like that, because they get stuck in this mode of constantly looking for the negatives about the other person's qualities.
Right.
And every single person has negative qualities.
Yeah.
So you're just like looking for, oh, they do this badly, they do this badly.
Right.
And they, you know, always what they do is they judge their spouse against other people's spouses.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, my wife doesn't cook that well, and his wife cooks really well. I mean, you cook well.
Whatever. It's just about you can't do takeout right now.
But you know, they'll start making the judgments like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, his wife cleans the whole house and this person's wife doesn't.
Right.
And they're just constantly like, you start zeroing in on the negative qualities.
Yeah.
Right? Until that's all you can see.
Yeah.
Right? And the Prophet's saying, okay, there might be some things you don't like about each other. Look at the thing that you do like. Focus on that. And then like that will increase your appreciation. You'll start finding more things that you like about the person, and like it'll increase your gratitude, and it'll increase like that sense of optimism. Why are you always looking to the bad side when you can look at the good side? Yeah. Right? And there was like another one of these studies as well where they took, I think it was like cleaning women, like in a hotel, housekeeping, stuff like that. And they went to them and they, again, they separated them to two groups. And they asked them, like, how healthy do you think you are? And they took, like, the women that said, we'd never work out and we're very unhealthy, our lifestyle is really unhealthy. They took them, they separated them into two groups. Right. One group they left alone. The other group, they said to them, you know, they had a 10-minute presentation, they gave them a paper, and they said, you guys are actually really healthy. You're always on your feet, you're cleaning, you know, pushing a vacuum, you're doing this, you're actually doing so much exercise, you're actually exceeding and going beyond, you know, the Surgeon General in the U.S.'s recommendations of exercise, whatever. So they just give them this spiel, and then the women who got that spiel, they actually lost weight without actually going to the gym or anything. Just the mentality of, oh, what I'm doing is good for my body, made their body lose weight. Whereas the women who, you know, didn't get that pep talk and didn't think optimistically about their situation, they're pushing the same vacuum, but they didn't lose weight. Right. And it just goes, what do you want to focus on? What do you want to think about? What do you want to consume yourself with, right? Yeah. And you see it again in the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when, you know, people's names, somebody comes in with a negative name, he changes it to a positive name, right? Somebody comes and says, you know, my name is, you know, Hazan. Hazan means difficulty. The Prophet says, no, your name is Sad. You know, Your name is ease. And you see this constantly in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. One, her name was Asiya. Asiya means disobedient. And the Prophet says, no, your name is Jamila. Beautiful, right? So he changes the person's name to instead be, the most optimistic sense of the word, because he wants to train people to think always optimistically.
Yeah.
And not to think the other way.
And that's an interesting point too, because people don't think of optimism as a skill that develops over time. They just think of it as a mindset, right? So either you're optimistic or you're not. Like it's a right black or white. But you can actually train your mind to become more optimistic. So if you start doing activities like, journaling and thinking about what are all the things that you're looking forward to over the next year, and you just start writing them out, and you write them out consistently, over time you naturally become more optimistic. Mm-hmm. But it's not something you can just turn on. It's not like you can just tell someone like, oh, you're being too pessimistic, like wake up, get out of it, right? And they're going to all of a sudden magically be optimistic. Mm-hmm. It's something they actually need to develop and something they actually need to practice on a constant basis. So the name part is so relevant, because that's what they're hearing all the time, right? It's the narrative that they're hearing.
Right.
So if the narrative is positive, and that's the narrative you're telling yourself every day, if it's positive, you become more optimistic over time, right? So there's a narrative piece there.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think like the other thing we were talking about before was that like people think that you're successful, therefore you're optimistic, right? Yeah. So they look at like, so-and-so who's a CEO and has a lot of money, or so-and-so who's like super rich and everything's good in their life. And then they're like, oh, they're optimistic and super happy because they have money and whatnot. Whereas that may not actually be the case. It might work the opposite way, right?
Yeah, it actually is the opposite. So psychologists have done quite a bit of work on that to say people who are naturally more optimistic, and we're going to go into resiliency next week too, but resiliency is another trait. People who are more of that end up being more successful. And that even if you look at like some organizations, when they're hiring, they'll test for things like optimism. They test for things like outlook. Right. Because they know that if they hire, especially in things like sales, if they hire people who are naturally more optimistic, and that's their disposition, that they're more likely to keep going at it, and they're more likely to keep trying, and that they're not going to just let failure bring them back. So, it's interesting that is the connection there. Is definitely the positivity and the optimism is directly linked to becoming more successful. Right.
It's like because you're optimistic, you're more likely to be successful, versus you get successful, then all of a sudden you become optimistic, right?
Correct. Because you're more willing to overcome failure. You're more willing to try again when something bad happens, right? So
and take risks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Salesperson who makes a bunch of calls and gets rejected, their mindset is, well, I'm going to get the next one. I'm going to get the next one. I'm going to get the next one. Whereas a pessimist makes a couple of calls, doesn't get success, and then says, this isn't for me, I can't do it anymore, and that's it, right? And they kind of fail out of it. So there's definitely a correlation there.
Right. And like I think the other point that you made earlier is so important too, is that like it's not something that you can just snap your fingers. And you know what, I'm kind of guilty of this, because I think those of us who are in da'wah, or we give khutbahs and stuff, you give one khutbah and you're like, you need to be optimistic, the prophets were optimistic, you need to go and be optimistic, which is true. Nothing about that is wrong. But it's like you can't snap your fingers and suddenly become optimistic. No. This is a journey. This is a struggle. This is something that you have to like slowly build up in yourself, right? Just like you can't go to the gym and just all of a sudden pick up the heaviest thing. You got to slowly build yourself towards it. You have to mentally slowly build yourself towards this, right?
And it has to be intentional. Like it really does. If it's something that you want to become, it has to be intentional and something that you ingrain into your day-to-day every single day. So what is one thing I'm looking forward to accomplishing today? Set that out right from the start.
Right.
Or one thing I'm looking to accomplish this week or this month or whatever, and then measure against that, right? And it needs to be something that motivates you, but it's something that you actually need to practice every single day.
Right. So like create benchmarks on like what you actually want to achieve, and trying to build like your sense of optimism through that.
Yeah.
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 And that's really important. I think like people should do this. I mean, I think we wanted to do. I wanted to mention
questions?
this later.
I don't know if there's any questions on the line either, but I would love to hear. We've just been kind of chatting over here, but I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions or comments.
I may not be seeing all the comments myself, so I'm kind of see if there's anything out there. Bismillah. See if there are. There may not be. Well,
That's okay. I just wanted to give them that opportunity, if so.
Yeah. Khair, inshallah. So I think like there was a point that I kind of wanted to deal with, but I kind of I think I lost my train of thought on it. But I think just generally, like, this is something that we should all do. Yeah, I think I wanted to do a talk on gratefulness, so maybe this kind of bled into the gratitude idea.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a study from UC Davis, I think, where people talked about people took people who were depressed, and they made them do this exercise of every day that they woke up in the morning, they had to write down 10 things they were grateful for. And the people who did that, their depression got a lot better. They were more successful in dealing with it. Even their physical, like their blood pressure improved and their cholesterol improved, and like their physical body actually improved from it. And I think like that's something that it's not like you could just tell somebody be grateful. Like you got to go through exercises of trying to be grateful, right? The exercise of trying to think about things that can help you be optimistic in our circumstance, right? You'd actually struggle, think about what can make me optimistic about the situation, right? And remind yourself of that. And it's not going to be easy to build that in yourself. It's going to take a little bit of time to kind of get there.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because there's actually physiological there's physiological parts of the brain that are responsible for interpreting negative information and interpreting positive information. And what's interesting is that everybody, no matter what your disposition is, so if you're a optimist, if you're a realist, if you're a slightly pessimistic, if they're given positive information, that part of their brain lights up really quickly. So there's an optimistic point for you, is that if you're listening to positive information, that part of your brain kind of lights up. However, the negative part that processes negative information, people who are optimists, it actually doesn't light up as much. So if you give someone who's an optimist negative information, their brain doesn't process it as strongly as somebody who's negative or somebody who's pessimistic. So it's like the positive of that is that if you were to increase in your optimism and you were to strengthen that one part of your brain, the other part of your brain kind of tends to dull down a bit. Versus if you're always in this constant cycle, that part of your brain will light up very quickly. So the negative part of your brain will light up very quickly when you're given negative information. So it's just something to think about, is that there's actually physiological impact if you practice this skill.
Well, that's great. So I don't know if we have any questions. I actually can't see them, so I apologize if somebody has been asking anything and we kind of missed it. But I think, alhamdulillah, we covered a lot of the points that we set out to cover. The Prophet ﷺ really encouraged the believer to constantly be hopeful, constantly think that Allah will make good things happen. The Prophet says, لا يموتن أحد منكم إلا ويحسن ظنه بالله, that none of you should pass away, should die, except that you are having beautiful thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, I hope that inshallah this is something that we can kind of take to heart and really focus on increasing our our ability to see the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, to look forward to the beautiful things that Allah can give us, and to have that positive mindset towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bless us with.
Ameen, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, inshallah. We'll see you guys Thursday. We're doing another one that Omnia, inshallah, will be leading.
Angie's asking, someone is asking how to be optimistic. So what are some of those practical ways to be optimistic, I think is the question. So as I mentioned earlier, like one of the tactics that we encourage around positivity or around optimism is that journaling. So, taking account of what are those things that you're optimistic for. Your brain is really receptive to information that you give it. So if you are constantly journaling things that you're optimistic for, your brain can actually become more excited about those things. And that gives you a more optimistic mindset. So that's one way that we would say typically works well. Let me think of another way. Another way is, again, just shifting your mindset. So when you're given a negative situation, it's looking at, we talked earlier about permanence. So asking yourself, how permanent is this? How permanent is this what I'm in right now? So even, for example, if we're talking about the COVID-19 situation, instead of letting your mind snowball and say, oh, it's going to take at least another 18 months and it's going to take this and I'm already so bored and getting into that, if you can kind of just take a step back and say, you know, subhanAllah, maybe most of us will live, you know, maybe 60, 70 years, Allahu Alam, but like, so maybe perhaps 6 months of my life is impacted, right? Like that's really all it is. It's really not a permanent state. And again, looking to the positive. So whenever you're in a negative situation, it's trying to outline what are those positive things around it. Right. So some of you may be getting laid off from work, which is of course a very sad event to be going through and can really get us very depressed and down. But it's shifting that to say, well, alhamdulillah, you know, I might live in a country that provides employment insurance in the short term that will help me get through the next few months. You know, maybe this is an opportunity for me to look for something that I actually like doing. I actually don't really like my job. You know, so just kind of trying to look at what are some of those positives. Maybe it helps one of you take care of the children more than the other. There's always positive in every negative situation. And we actually had Arlene Dickinson come to my place of employment right before the coronavirus kind of went wild. And one of the things she talked about, and she's had a really difficult life, she's obviously very successful now, but one of the things she talked about was using every moment as a learning opportunity. And so even every negative situation she falls into, she would say, what can I learn right now from this moment? What can I, what can I take away? What can I learn for the next time that I do this? And so that's another way to be optimistic. So any challenges that you're facing right now with COVID-19, I would say really try to look at what am I learning from this? What am I learning about myself or about my family? And that kind of will help you get out of that mind shift. Did I miss something else?
I think something as well to, maybe to add is to kind of envision what that future state would look like. Like we mentioned about the Prophet ﷺ in Al-Ta'if, that he's looking to that future state of, what might that future state look like? What might that future situation look like? And, I'm telling people, like, this whole COVID thing, like, you're going to be telling, inshallah, your grandkids about this, right? Yeah. You're going to be sitting with them and you're going to be like, I remember when, hockey and basketball and all this stuff was canceled and everything was canceled and there was no flights and, it's going to be a story you're going to be telling. And so, like, just thinking of that and positively thinking, like, there's going to be this time where, you're going to have peace and security and prosperity and you're going to have kids and they're going to have grandkids and all that. And you're going to be able to talk to them about this. I think that just helps you be more optimistic, helps you kind of deal with the stresses of the moment, realizing that, there's more to it than this. And that it's not fully, permanent, like you mentioned. Yeah.
The other question is, can you cover being optimistic and what Allah will do for you and how that will affect your chances of getting what it is you want?
Yeah, so I think the example we mentioned earlier, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he's, with the elderly man, and the man says, like, for sure I'm going to the grave, like I'm dying for sure because of this illness. And the Prophet says, idhan fana'am, right? Like in that case, it's true, right? Yeah. If you think differently, perhaps you can have something different. Now, everything in the end of the day is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're never guaranteed to have exactly what we want. But the believer is always optimistic, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give them what they want or what is good for them, right? Or whatever is good for them. So the example of Hajar alayhi salam, Prophet Ibrahim leaves her in the middle of the desert with her young child, just a water skin of water, and that's it. And he walks away, and she's running after him. She's saying, why are you leaving me here? Why are you leaving me here? And then she says, did Allah order you to leave me here? And he says, yes. So she says, إِذَنْ لَا يُضَيِّعْنَا. In that case, Allah will not abandon us. Like, I don't know why Allah is causing me to be here. I don't know what's the purpose of me being in the middle of the desert with a baby that requires to be breastfed, and I don't have anything to take care of him. Yeah. I don't know why, but you know what? Allah is going to take care of me. Yeah. Right? And if you do that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you things from where you don't even expect it. Yes. Right? Yeah. And so you just have to constantly, and subhanAllah, how many times have you wanted something in your life and Allah prevented you from getting it? And if you were pessimistic and gave up, you would have gotten nothing. But if you were optimistic and said, okay, Allah didn't give me this, but maybe I'll get something else, that you end up getting something that was actually way better than the thing you wanted to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? Like you wanted a certain job, you didn't get that job, Allah gives you a better job.
Yeah.
Right? You wanted to marry a certain person and you're insistent on it and you're asking for it and Allah doesn't let you marry that person, then you get married to a better person.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, in retrospect, you're like, oh my God, what was I even thinking previously? Right?
Yeah.
So these are things that shows you the power of being optimistic. But if you give up, right? If you despair, then these things kind of fall away from the person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's very good. Okay, I think we're pretty much at time.
I think we're gonna end here. I'm really sorry. I don't know why I can't see people's comments. You know, some people tried to
figure it out.
Yeah,
Sorry.
some people messaged us the comments, some of the comments that were out there. But you know, I really apologize, inshallah, if we missed any of your questions. Inshallah, this Thursday, same time, 9 p.m. inshallah, Eastern Standard Time, we're gonna have a discussion on how do we build resiliency, and Omnia is gonna take the lead on that. She has a presentation actually on it. And so she'll be going through a lot of the points and really more practical. Like today was maybe more theoretical in terms of like the importance of optimism from an Islamic perspective, but the next one will be a lot more practical, actual tips, how do we implement them, and things like that, inshallah. So we hope that you guys will join us then on Thursday. Jazakumullah khair, and we'll see you then.
Okay, have a great night everyone, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. We should pause the Instagram too.
Yeah.